And she's a real zero waste pioneer. And we thought it'd be really good to bring you all something a little more practical than what we had a few weeks ago with Sean, which is kind of the big picture side of things, side of politics. And we were talking about relaunching the economy and a green recovery after COVID-19. So today we'll be talking a lot about waste, different kinds of waste, and how you can hopefully reduce it. You've probably seen some of the stats around waste, and some of it's very shocking. 4.5 million tons of household food waste per year. And that's actually gone down a little bit in the last few years. But when I was doing my research, that's still apparently 10 billion meals that are essentially wasted every year by households alone. And that's before you even consider the kind of the plastic side of things and the wider recycling. And I think we've seen the single-use plastic gone up during this coronavirus lockdown period, which is sort of out of necessity, but is also quite worrying as well in terms of, not settling into bad behaviors and habits as we go forward. And that's not to mention the kind of bigger elephant in the room, which is this whole supermarket and manufacturing side of things and all of the waste that they produce as well. But we've got Kate here to help us out, and she's going to be talking about her own experiences in Tewkesbury, where she is, but also thinking more generally about all these topics. So Kate was elected as a Green Councillor in Tewkesbury. She's the only Green Councillor there, so a little bit like our situation here in St Albans with our Green Councillor, Simon Grover. And she's been intensely focused on waste reduction in the kind of household sense and also the local community as well. You can follow her on Twitter, Cate Cody Eco, and also her blog, ecocody.com, where she's got lots of tips on the kind of things that she'll be talking about. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Kate. She's going to speak for about 25-30 minutes. And I'll ask you to stay off the chat, actually, if that's okay, and really just focus on what Kate's got to say. She's got a few props for us as well, I think, so look out for those. And then we'll do a Q&A when Kate's done at about 25 to 1, and we'll take that to the end till 1 o'clock. So yeah, that's it. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you, just unmuting myself. Okay. Well, thanks very much for hosting today, and thanks to the attendees. Really, really pleased you can be with us today, especially as it's a Friday lunchtime and it's very, very hot. Something for waste nerds like me is one thing, but for everybody else, so I really appreciate that. Normally I do a prepared speech, but this is sort of needing audience participation, and as everybody's on mute, that's not really going to work. So I've just got a few notes and I shall go through them, and here we go. So although this is a talk about waste, it's not necessarily about waste. It's really, really about holistic living. And I suppose if you look at permaculture, that's this sort of agricultural, sustainable ecosystem. And I look at my lifestyle really as a kind of personal permaculture. So although I'm talking about waste today, lots of other things will come into it. And hopefully you'll understand that as we go along. So as already has been said, bit of a waste nerd, etc. Now we have wheelie bins here. They're collected every 2 weeks. Ours hasn't been out since January 2017. So that's 3.5 years. And we're about, it's probably about a third full, maybe a little bit more than that. I'm going to give you the 3 main reasons, the 3 ways that we've sort of achieved this. And I think the first one is basically that we are completely and utterly rubbish consumers. We're really, really bad about consumerism. We try not to do it. That's the first, biggest tip. The second is that we have very good systems in place. And the third one does involve a lot of ambition. Now we keep a small lidded box outside the front door, and into that we'll put things like spent light bulbs and scrap metal, the sort of things that you can't put in your normal council collected recycling. Now I appreciate that that's different for everybody, and that's a complete nightmare in this country. It would be a lot better if we all had the same system, but generally people can recycle a few things with their councils now. So for us, anything that doesn't go into that waste stream, goes into the box. And then when we're passing, maybe once, twice a year, we're already passing a recycling centre, we'll drop it off. So I'm going to give you an example of my scrap metal. This lives in the porch. This is my scrap metal pot. And yes, tiny bits. We're talking staples and paper clips. I'm that sad. But the point is that if every UK office worker saved just one staple a day, there would be 72 tonnes of metal at the end of the year, which A, shows how the little things add up, and B, if you really want to minimise your waste, you have to stop putting everything in your bin. I'm going to talk a little bit about food. I think one of the most important things, and we all know this, is that we should be eating an awful lot more vegetables and grains and things like that. So even if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, we need to be reducing the amount of meat, fish and dairy that we consume. And I would extend this as well to portion size. So a lot about what I'm doing is about reducing, and actually in the West, most of us do eat too much. So that's the first thing. Veg is brilliant. It's easy to grow. Now, I don't have a particularly big garden, but I've got a miniature apple tree, a miniature pear tree, lots and lots of fruit and vegetables. In fact, so much now that I've got lettuce growing inside in pots because I ran out of them. But even if you don't have a garden, that's my point. And we'll talk a little bit later about community gardens and things like that for people who don't have them. Two main things with food then. This is where the sort of permaculture of it comes in. Personally, I'm on a bit of a mission to avoid supermarkets. And by doing this, I'm avoiding things like plastic and all sorts of waste and things that I don't need. The second thing that I want to say about food really is that we keep a second bank account, a separate bank account for food. And we noticed that even though we're upping the quality of our food, and we're probably now about 85–90% organic, we're eating better quality food, sometimes less of it, but we're actually not spending any more money. And a lot of people say to me, well, you know, it's okay for the middle class and et cetera, but we actually spend less money on food than we used to. And this is about waste. When you spend more on your food, you tend not to waste it. Plastics. For people like me who have stopped flying, I don't own a car, we've got a green tariff for our energy, and I'm thinking, well, this is all great. I'm avoiding the fossil fuel industry. But actually, plastics are a byproduct of the fossil fuel industry. So in the 1940s and the 1950s, when plastics were taking off, it's the byproduct the fossil fuel industry was taking off. And the byproduct is plastics. And they either had to pay to get rid of the plastics, or they had to do something else with them. And they've turned them into things. And what an industry that has become. The scary thing is that actually probably about 2% of all plastics are recycled. And more than half of the plastic that's ever been produced has only been produced in the last 15 years. And this is actually set to get even bigger. So plastics are a huge, huge, really, really important thing that we need to try and avoid. And I will do that at all costs. Okay, so a couple of examples then. These things, these sort of sponges, they are very, very cheap. You use them, they get a bit smelly, and you chuck them away. The alternative, the non-plastic version, is something like this. It's a loofah, it's made from a natural material. And it's got a little loop here, so that hangs on the tap. And because it's a natural material, it actually dries quite quickly, and it tends not to get so smelly. Now, my point about the two items is this is really cheap, so you just use it, and when it gets a bit whatever, you chuck it away. This one has cost you a lot more money, so if it gets a bit tatty, you don't think, oh, I'll just get a new one. It's cost quite a lot more money, so you'll tend to use it a lot longer. And actually, they last for quite a long time. You can pour boiling water on them to clean them up and things like that. And we don't actually spend any more money than we used to when we bought the cheap ones. Another example will be something like cotton buds. The whole point of this is that they are really, really too cheap. Plastic is way, way too cheap. And if you're using cotton buds, I don't know, an art project, something cleaning or whatever, They're so cheap and you're pulling them out and you're using them. When you go to use the paper stemmed ones, and because they're made of card, the stems are card, so they can actually go into the compost. They are more expensive. So again, you're thinking, instead of pulling them out like this, you're thinking, well, I could use that a little bit more, and or you might use an alternative. You might think, could I use a piece of cloth for that or something different? So again, we're not actually spending any more money because we're taking much more care of the things we use. And I think that's a really important point with plastic. It's so disposable and cheap. These things are more expensive, but at what cost? And I think the other thing is that these sorts of things are affordable because we're not spending our money on all the other items that we don't need. There's so many items that we have in our lives and we're bombarded by it and we're told we need this and that and the other. And actually by simplifying your life and not buying as much in the first place, you then find that you have the income to pay for the things that are a little bit more expensive. I have lots more examples of those, and I will come back to those a little bit later, I think. Recycling. Well, really, this sounds like a weird thing, but I try to avoid it wherever possible. People imagine that because we have so much, so little waste, that we're going to have so much recycling. And our bin, again, a wheelie bin, could go out 26 times a year, but ours probably only goes out about 6 times. We all know about the R's, about the refusing and the reducing and reusing, and they're really important. Recycling should be the absolute last option. So we'll avoid it by things such as egg boxes and tomatoes come in these punnets. Because we have a veg box, these aren't made of plastic, but they can also be sent back because we know the supplier and they can be reused again. The same with wine bottles, glass bottles. I send them to friends, I'll give them to fetes, school fetes, church fetes, those sorts of things, so that they can be reused. It's much, much better to reuse. And then junk mail. I don't have any, but I'm using this as an example. Now, people say to me, junk mail, it's fine, you can just put it in the recycling. But for me, that's a complete waste of paper, of ink, of transport, of my time, of the posties' time. In fact, they love me because they don't want to carry this stuff around. And quite often people will say to them, well, put it straight in the recycle bin. Well, by law, they can't do that. They have to put it through your door. So you can't just put a little note on your door saying no junk mail. You actually have to go onto the Royal Mail's website and download a form and fill it in. And they'll try and threaten you and say, well, you won't get this and you won't get that. And it occurred to me that I probably wouldn't get my own election leaflets, but actually I still did, so that was fine. And it didn't really matter to me because I know who I'm going to vote for. Okay, I think the thing with recycling is it's about the responsibility. There was a big article on the news yesterday about plastics going off to Turkey. And the thing is, if I have something like a toilet roll tube, if I put that in my compost, I'm recycling it, but I'm recycling it here at home. I know where it's going. So wherever humanly possible, I will try and reduce my recycling. Having said that, there are some things that at the moment we still need to recycle. It's well worth having a look at Terracycle. They give all sorts of options for difficult things that can't be recycled. And I've set up some of these as a town councillor. Now, I would never buy, these are the plastic that go around drinks cans. I wouldn't buy something like that, but I sometimes find these when I'm doing litter picking or just pick one up from the street. And there is a recycling stream for this. I will always cut them because they're very dangerous to wildlife. And then I'll take them down and get those recycled. But I wouldn't personally be buying anything like that. And buying brings me rather neatly to advertising. Now, for me, this is sort of the opposite to soul nourishing. We don't have a TV, I don't bother with magazines, we don't have junk mail, so it's quite useful, all that. I'm not being bombarded by all these things that I'm supposed to have. I don't know I'm supposed to have them, therefore I don't feel that I need them. And a good example with advertising would be something like the razor industry. So after the war, the razor industry, they lost an awful lot of their sales because obviously there weren't the men there buying the razors, and they thought, well, what can we do? We need to have better sales. So they designed some advertising that said that women should shave their legs and be smooth and beautiful. So it's well worth thinking about all these things. Why do we do certain things? It's about advertising. It's the same with things like cleaning products and coffee. Every advert, you've got to have a coffee, you've got to have a clean thing, you've got to have a clean house. All these images that are being bombarded at us. Why do we really, it's about worth thinking if we really need these things. Which then takes me to corporations and brands. One of the key things that we found that has enabled us to reduce a lot of waste is by completely avoiding brands. And this can be whether it's something you're eating with your food, or it can be the clothes that you're wearing. I always want to know where that money is going. So when I buy my veg box and my eggs, I know the money is going directly to Jim, who lives down the road. And that's really, really important to me. I've stopped eating things like Marmite because they are owned by Unilever, Coleman's Mustard. There are all sorts of websites where you can look at the list of things. There is actually a better alternative to Marmite, I have to say, if you're a Marmite lover, which obviously I am. That was quite a hard one, but I found an alternative. The thing is with the corporations is they have so much money, they get bigger and bigger, they swallow up more and more companies, and quite often as individuals we feel powerless. We don't know what we can do. We don't have the government we want, we don't have certain laws, the supermarkets aren't doing what we want. The power I do have is what I buy, and I want to give my money to individuals and independents, and that's really, really important, and we can all do that as individuals. Now, a lot of what I talk about is not actually that new. A lot of it our grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents were doing. We need to be creative about things, and I'm not saying that what they did was brilliant and everything we do today is not good. I don't mean that. We're using technology now. It's a modern thing. It's brilliant. We have this talk enabling me to talk to you without traveling anywhere. So some things are good, but we need to look at the best of the old and new things. And a good example would be something like soap that people used to use. Now, shower gel, it comes in a plastic container for a start. You put it on your hand, it slips down the sink, mostly. And, you don't really know what's going onto your body and into the water course. With some simple soap like this, I know it's not got palm oil on it, and I know there's no animal fats, and it smells great. It comes in a cardboard box, there's no packaging. These things are not always that difficult. Really simple steps. Page 1, soap. Page 2, a water bottle. And you get used to them. When I stopped using shower gel at first, it didn't feel that great. But actually now, I don't like shower gel. It feels disgusting and slimy on my skin. And I don't like the smell of it either. Now, people will say to me, gosh, it must take so much time. And actually, that's not true. I've actually saved an awful lot of time by reducing the sorts of things that I do and the sorts of things that I buy and bring into my home. Because I don't use the supermarkets very much, if I do go in there, it's actually really quick. I can go down whole aisles where I know I'm not going to be buying anything. We have approximately three cleaning products in our home, so I don't buy them from the supermarket. I can skip that aisle. I can skip the aisle with all the biscuits and things. I don't eat sugar. I don't like the food miles. I don't like what it does to your body. And quite often those sorts of products are associated with lots of corporations and brands and lots of plastic as well. But there are other things you can do that are time savers and quite often money savers too. So if you wash your hair once a week, or if you wash your hair twice a week, do it once a week. Things like washing, we all put our washing machines on too often. What would our great-grandparents have done? Well, if they'd spilt one thing down here, they wouldn't have put the whole article into the washing machine. They would have just sponged it off. I think the key to a lot of this is about simplicity. And it's not about stopping choice. It's about opening up choice in a way that that I'm not overwhelmed by so many things. I want a much more simple way of doing things. In some ways, I think we're fairly numbed in today's society. We've lost things like our sense of smell. I talked about that a little bit with the shower gel, but I also would relate that to things like bleach and chemicals, which I don't use. I don't want my washing powder to smell of anything. I just want the washing to be clean. Things like perfume, we don't need these things masking our natural senses, really. And we've almost lost our sense of smell, our sense of time. We're very reliant on what's the time by looking at our digital devices. Directions, nobody or few people can find their way around now because they all rely on a sat nav. So for me, I want to remove myself from all those sorts of gadgets, and I've really tried to eliminate them. Yes, I'm using a computer now and I have a phone, but apart from that, I think we have a kettle and a washing machine and a fridge. It's really, really very simple around here. And I think with those things that we've lost, I would include to an extent things like kindness and love. And I think by emptying our worlds of all this consumerism and things we don't need, it opens us up to the things that we do and friendship and community. And that sort of brings me neatly in a way that we're bombarded by this image of cleanliness and purity and all of this, and that we don't in our conversations talk enough about the gory side of life. So I will tell people that I cut my fingernails and put them in the compost. You know, let's talk about poo, nappies. We should be putting our children into reusable nappies. They are an absolutely dreadful thing that we throw away. And I've had people say to me, well, the children at nursery were not allowed. But then I've heard other people say, well, my nursery take them. So talk to your nursery and say, I want my child to come here, but we want to be able to use reusable nappies. And for women and periods, we don't talk about that enough. Get yourself a moon cup or make or buy some washable pads. The average woman will send something like 11,000 tampons in her lifetime away, and they'll end up basically in landfill, incineration, or in the sea. Also, with rubbish, I don't use a liner for our kitchen bin. Our kitchen bin is really tiny. It's about that big. It's the only waste bin we have in the whole house. I don't put a liner in that because nothing is going in that bin that's smelly or dirty. So it can just go in loose, and that's really important later on, because when I first started taking full account of my waste and not emptying the bin, that was 3.5 years ago, and at that point you couldn't recycle, for example, crisp packets. But now I can just pop some gloves on and I can go back through the bin and I can take things out, such as crisp packets. So whilst everybody else is putting things in the bin, I'm actually taking them out, and that's enabled us to keep that waste stream down for a lot longer. Now, I talk about being a consumer. Of course I'm a consumer. We are all consumers, but hopefully what I've talked about today and what the point I've made is about going for better quality things and fewer things. It's really, really important. So really, really supporting the independence, repairing things, sharing, borrowing, secondhand, using Freecycle. And that's kind of where you come in, because a lot of this is DIY and a lot of this is about communities. And sometimes people say to me, well, I would use a loose food shop, but I don't have one near me, or I'd love to have a repair cafe, but we don't have one. And so I say to them, well, get together with a few people and set them up. I set up a Green-Minded People of Tewkesbury, a Facebook group for local people, about 3 or 4 years ago. And it's a brilliant place where we can swap ideas and information. If somebody's grown too many plants, they'll swap them. And because we're local, we can all do that by walking and cycling most of the time. I also set up a food group. That's the other thing I should have mentioned about food and avoiding supermarkets. So we get a veg box, and we also have a food group. I also grow quite a lot of veg myself. And the food group is done with an ethical supermarket, and it's done online, and they come and deliver to me about every couple of months. and then my food group will come and collect. So somebody has an electric car and they'll collect and drop to other people, that sort of thing. The other things with DIY, of course, you know, some people, it depends where you live. I appreciate that. It's different all over the country. We're quite lucky here because it's fairly rural, but we also have access to bigger towns and cities. But for people who say, well, I live too far or this or that, think about sharing transport, even if you shared a shopping trip together or did an online one together. Allotments, if there are enough of you, you can lobby your councils and ask them if you don't have gardens that you need allotments. There are also community gardens. I even had a friend once who knocked on the door of somebody, it was an old person who lived in a house and the garden was really overgrown. And he said, would you mind if I grew vegetables in your garden and then shared them with you? And it was a brilliant, obvious win-win situation because somebody who didn't have a garden that wanted one was able to help somebody who couldn't any longer sort of maintain their garden, and they both enjoyed the fruits of that, if you like. So this is the sort of holistic approach. And as Greens, community is so important, and it has been throughout lockdown, actually. Now, I'm telling you a lot of things here, but I'm not saying you have to do them. And one important thing, I guess, to remember would be that if you are very far removed from what I'm doing, you cannot create and do this sort of thing overnight. This has been a long journey for us. And really, as we eliminated things, we would notice regular imposters, and things for me were things like toothpaste tubes, because not a lot was going in the waste. So I just did some research and decided to make my own toothpaste, and that way I can avoid the plastic of toothpaste, etc. But I'm not saying you have to do any of this. I'm just showing you the sort of things that can be done. There are lots and lots of ideas. I've got plenty more things that I can show you. And really, for me, if one person takes one idea away today and implements it, then the world is a better place. As Stefan has already mentioned, I do write lots of blogs, and there are lots of different ideas: pets, children, Christmas, gifts, all sorts of things. So have a look at that. I'd also encourage you to sign a petition I started. I've got nearly 24,000 signatures now, and it's a 38 degrees petition. And I'm asking them to recycle medication blister packs, because that's one of the questions that does come up a lot to me. Now, I'm very fortunate I'm not on any medication, but for those people who are, that can be quite a huge amount of packaging. And obviously something like that, plastic is important in terms of security for some products. I'd also like to recommend 4 films. If you haven't already seen these, The Story of Plastics, that's a life-changing film. The Economics of Happiness is another great one. There's a French film called Demain, which translates as tomorrow. That's very inspiring, and it's some of these films can be a little bit doom and gloom and depressing, but Demain is really good because it's showing positive ways that we can change in our communities and societies. And although a lot of this is a sort of individual thing, and people say, well, normal people, if you like, for want of a better word, won't necessarily go to the lengths that you do. If I had a normal job or a normal life, I would still do this. And I think it's just important to show the way, and then people can take the little bits that they want to. And if we make it easier for them by setting up repair cafes and loose food shops, etc., then it will be easier for people. There's also a huge change, maybe in the last 5 years. I mean, I've been doing this a long, long time, but the shift from the public's view on all of this is enormous, and that's brilliant. And it's just individuals who are doing things, and then other people will look at them for a response. And I think that's really important. And the last film I'd recommend is a film called That Sugar Film. If you have a sweet tooth, I would definitely recommend that you have a look at that. Now, I've got lots of props. They may come up in the questions. I've probably talked for about half an hour. I'd like to thank everybody again for giving up a hot Friday afternoon. And do use the chat facility now if you've got any questions, if anything hasn't been covered. And I'll let Stefan jump in at any point if he wants to stop me, or if you've got some other questions. But I'm going to start with a couple that were sent to me previous to the talk. I'm just going to find them. Actually, I'm going to start with this one. I like this one. This was question 3, I think. Okay, so somebody called John has said that his wife uses a lot of fresh water, cleaning empty cans and food containers before putting them into the household waste. And she hopes they're going to be recycled and not end up in the landfill side. And he doesn't see the logic in it because he thinks that she's expending a valuable resource and, you know, fresh water to clean things, which could end up in the landfill. And sort of what's my view on that? And I've replied, actually, I've answered all the questions, and everybody can have a copy of those anyway. So if I don't get round to mentioning yours today, I've already answered it, and Stefan will send that round. But I've sort of firstly said that I'm really pleased that both of you care, because I think that's really important. Now, for me, we don't actually use a lot of tinned food at home. We tend to just have tinned tomatoes when the fresh ones are out of season, said tomato, and occasionally something like coconut milk. Now, what I would do is I'd either put the whole lot into cooking and then I would rinse that out and add that to the cooking pot. If I'm not going to use it all in cooking, I would still empty it into a pot that I'd then put in the fridge, and I would still empty out the can and put it into the cooking. And that way you're not sending any food particles down into the drainage system either. If that really isn't an option, if you can't add any extra water to it at all, then I would save that for the end of the washing up. I would personally never use fresh water to clean recycling. I hear that comment quite often, and it's fairly valid. Tins generally do get recycled. They're one of the good guys. They're easy to recycle, and they're easy because a lot of recycling is done on the weight of things, and obviously there's a bit of weight in metal, as opposed to plastics, which of course are very light. I would swill out other types of containers as well, depending on what they are, but at all costs, as I've already said, I would try to avoid plastic. Now, I do have Tupperwares. I wouldn't buy one of these new now. I would, if I needed one, I'd get a second-hand one. Wouldn't advocate buying one, but they're very useful, and I keep these with my shopping bags, and I take them if I'm going to any kind of shop. And delis and the supermarkets have got a lot better about people using these sorts of containers as well. Okay, Stefan, do we have any other questions?
Not yet, but please,
Okay.
everyone, please do pop your questions in. Maybe ask, you know, something you've been trying to do for years, not been able to do it, or you've heard other people talk about something and you want to know if that's actually true or false, or, you know, anything like that. I was quite interested in what Kate said around time, because I feel like, I don't know if other people feel the same, but I feel like, oh, I'm so busy. I care about green issues, obviously, would like to reduce my waste, but you start doing a bit of research and it just feels like, oh, you know, don't know where to begin. And so I was quite interested to sort of hear you say you're actually saving time. And I wondered if you could maybe share 1 or 2 examples about in what way have you saved time, or with what products or changes have you saved time?
Okay, well, I suppose something like a supermarket shop would be a really, really good example, because we don't use them very much, but if we do want to use them, for example, we have a Sainsbury's about 7 or 8 miles away, and so we'll cycle there. And because we're not buying too much, we can put it in a rucksack. But we've sort of integrated in our day our exercise by going to the supermarket. So then we're not sort of spending money or going to the gym, doing that as a form of exercise, and it's also coming away from the screen. And people will say, well, I haven't got time to nip in, and I'm a huge advocate, actually, if you do use supermarkets, of going little and often. And people say, well, no, I don't have the time, but when they do a big shop, they spend a lot longer in the supermarket. And if you're very sort of, I don't want to use the word controlled, but say the famous supermarkets of this sort of Aldi's and Lidl's of the world, you know the aisle I'm talking about. We just don't go down that aisle. We don't want to, we're not going to come out with something like a, I don't know, a shredder or a head shredder or a plastic shredder or whatever it is, because we're on the bikes and we can't carry it. And if we absolutely see something we think we really need, we could always go back and get it. But I think the point is that we avoid that aisle because most of it's made in China, coming from a long way away. If I didn't know I needed it, I probably don't. And it's really useful to go home and consider that purchase again before you buy it. Similar thing really with online as well. It's so easy just to click and buy something. Personally, I would much rather wait and find something secondhand in a charity shop or whatever, because mostly you don't need it instantly, although of course we're told we do. But the point with the shopping and the supermarket really is that people go, they have so much that I couldn't possibly walk or cycle, they've got to fill the car up, you get back, they fill the fridge, you can't see anything. And that's another way that really you're going to have a lot of food waste because everything's going off at the same time. And I'm quite keen on not having too much in my fridge. And again, basing it around vegetables. So a classic for me would be, I've got a courgette in the garden, not quite ready today, maybe tomorrow, maybe Sunday, and that will then form what we're going to eat that day based on the courgette. We're going to have some roast vegetables with some couscous or something like that. But the waste thing in the fridge, you have fewer things in there, you're much, much less likely to waste them. And again, coming back to food, I use the analogy, it's a bit of a weird one because I say, I think it's a sirloin steak or whatever, the one that's supposed to be really expensive. And I say to people, if you had that in your fridge, you wouldn't waste it. If you had a cheap tin of Valley beans, you possibly would. And for me, by spending more on my food, I've paid more, I don't want to waste it. So if I have something like a bowl of porridge and I haven't finished it, what I would do is not eat anything else until I finish that, because personally I'm thinking, well, there are people starving in the world. I don't really have, for me, I feel I don't have the right to put that in the food waste. So we don't actually generate any food waste because we compost. And so things will go into there. And if it can't be composted and it's totally inedible, for an example, would be roasted garlic skin, something like that, then I see that as food waste. I don't really like the terminology that they use. And in fact, that was one of the questions, what do I do for liners? And the lady that asked the question was quite right. We shouldn't use plastic as liners. I've already said I don't use one in the bin at all. It all goes in loose. And for food waste, I would use newspaper, or I would make a bag. Just look up origami and make your own newspaper bag, or use a secondhand paper bag, or even an envelope. Some post has come through the door, and I would use that envelope because our food waste is tiny and there's not much of it anyway. So yeah, I think the time-wise, food is probably quite a big one, because there are a lot of things now we don't buy because we don't buy brands, and we're basing a lot more on what's seasonal, because our veg box is a seasonal one. It's not one where you choose what you want. He gives us what is grown. That also keeps the price down because, for obvious reasons. And it also makes me eat things that I wouldn't necessarily buy. I'm not a huge, big fan of squash, but it is good for you, and it's in the veg box and it's in season, and therefore I'm going to eat it. And in some ways that's going to keep us healthier as well, because the food is grown locally. I'm getting a huge range of different vitamins, etc. So I think the supermarket is a really interesting one, because people will say, well, I don't have time, but I would definitely advocate going 2 or 3 times, nipping in and out, rather than doing the big shop, which also is very car centric. That's a very long answer.
That's okay. Thanks, Kate. I've got a top tip for people out there, actually. I started getting into baking over the lockdown, as many people did. Ran out of baking parchment quite early, but actually just using some butter as that kind of greasing agent has worked really well, despite what, as you have said, people sort of say, or the industry out there would have you think that you need these, you need this baking paper, etc. But I just made a loaf of sourdough bread this morning, and just using butter on the baking pot, and it's fine. Anyways, that's my little tip.
That's a really good tip, actually, because one of the first things we did was to stop using cling film, and we replaced that years ago with foil. But actually, when you look it up, foil's not great for the environment, and although it can be recycled, it's a precious metal. It's not ideal. So then we stopped using foil, and again, we just thought, what would our great-grandparents didn't use foil. They didn't use cling film. What did they use? Exactly. And for people who have a vegan diet, you can use coconut oil as another, or olive oil. Absolutely. We don't we don't need these things, and you just wash it up at the end.
Yeah.
And I've got another tip here. So this is a really good example. This bag here. This wrapper is plastic free and 100% compostable and can be placed in your compost heap, green garden waste bin, or kitchen food waste caddy. And that came from Equity. So well done, Equity. I will write to them, I will tweet it, I'll say brilliant. Contrasting with Local Government Association, this plastic bag here. Now it does say recycle with carrier bags at larger supermarkets. But, and this relates to another question I had about plastics. Should we be encouraging the recycling of them? Absolutely no. I completely agree with the person who sent that question in. So I will write to the Local Government Association, I'll say, can't you use what Equity are using? Okay, you're telling me to recycle it, but we now know that a lot of this recycling ends up in Turkey or China or wherever, i.e. somebody's back garden or the sea. So we need to avoid it. And actually through the post, I think my Co-op ethical supermarket catalogue has just come through. That's just a catalogue. There's no plastic at all. It doesn't need a wrapper. It's just got my address printed on it. So the power of the consumer is huge. And one of the questions I had was what we do about supermarkets. Now, as you've heard, personally, I want to avoid them, but I do appreciate that a lot of people are using them. And I've said to the answer I've given to that question is go in and ask to have a meeting with the manager. I've done that several times and they're really, really helpful. And the more people, the more pressure we put on them. But that also comes back round to what I've said about advertising and corporations and brands, because the corporations basically own the government. And we can say as much as we want, government need to tell, blah, blah, blah. So the government say to the supermarkets, peer pressure, public pressure, wants pure plastics, etc., come on, supermarkets, do something. And the supermarkets turn around and say, well, do you want our money or not? So unfortunately, the way, if you look at the politics, if you always go back to the person that it ends with, so for, again, my example with the veg box, the money goes to him, he's growing it in a field, it's staying in the local economy. We know that money stays in the local economy. The things that you buy from independent shops will stay in the local economy, whereas if you buy things from branded places like Starbucks and Costa and McDonald's and whatever, that money is corporate money and it will go out of your town. So it's just so important to avoid them personally, you know, I think at all costs.
So we've had some questions that kind of started around supermarkets as well, around putting pressure on supermarkets to avoid all the single-use plastics, etc. David says he's kind of worried about his potential limited knowledge around these subjects and trying to kind of talk to these big supermarkets or their managers about how to reduce that. And some people have also asked about your impact as a town councillor and what you can achieve on that front in terms of bringing that side of you to some of these bigger businesses. So could you share a bit about what you've maybe done as a councillor to confront some of these issues, and where people like David could find some good information so that they could better educate themselves?
Okay, I'll start with David's question, and I think that's a really valid point actually, and I wouldn't be too hard on yourself by asking the question. That's all you need to do. You're already doing it. You don't need to be an expert. You are the consumer. You don't need to think about the bigger picture. You go in and you just point to examples. You ask for a meeting, you point to examples and say, if, I don't know, tins of tuna or something, if you buy 4, they're wrapped in plastic, but the single ones are more, so if I buy 4 single ones, why is that more expensive? You know, just keep asking any questions that you think you want to know as an individual. All this and the experience will grow. That's how it's happened from my point of view. So it's just looking around, using your eyes and things like that, and also comparing. So I think Iceland have done quite a lot. Personally, I don't use them, but they are sort of leading the way in terms of reducing plastics. Go to a couple of different shops. I did a bit of a project on this, trying to sort of tweak the supermarkets and say, get rid of your plastics. And, you know, go into certain supermarkets, take photographs of what's good as well as what's bad. So instead of us always nagging and saying this, this, and this, it's really good as well to have positives. So you can go into the shop and you can say, look, you can buy this and there's no packaging at all. That's brilliant. Things like swede. Why on earth is that wrapped in plastic? Cucumbers and stuff like that. Some things are a bit more fragile and we need to think a bit more carefully. But there are alternatives. I know a long time ago, Sainsbury had their organic packaging, and that was biodegradable, and it cost a penny more. That, you know, some of these things really, and the consumer are prepared to pay 1p more. I think just ask the questions that as an individual, go in, have a look at the supermarket, find the things that strike you as being particularly horrific. And if you can think, well, the other supermarket manage it this way, or, you know, what, or take a specific example. And if you're not sure, email me or do some research. That's how I do it. You just kind of grow on these things, really. And then the town council, it's interesting because I'm a borough councillor and a town councillor. And in some ways, there have been swifter changes at town council. There's sort of more we can do a lot quicker. I think I mentioned earlier about Terracycle and the plastics that go round cans. So I've set up recycling for that. We're in the midst of setting up a recycling station for wine corks. We've also done toothpaste and toothpaste tubes and floss tubes and toothbrushes. Personally, I use a bamboo one. So there's sort of various waste streams, and we've done that at the town hall, and they are prepared to be a collection point. That's where the town council and the officers are based, and they're a collection point, and then a little bit of money that's raised will go to the mayor's charities. And we're fortunate because we can post them through the letterbox at town council if the building is closed. Other things we've done is we've become a water station. So if you're in the town of Tewkesbury, you don't want to go in and buy a plastic water bottle from a shop. You can go into the town hall and refill your water bottle. This is kind of page one. And if you can, get a metal one rather than a plastic one. It's quite an interesting point to make. I've got a bottle here, just reach it. That if you do end up with one of these from a supermarket, from a cafe or a restaurant, you know, you don't want to buy Coca-Cola or whatever and you want some water, I would recommend that you take that home, because the majority, at the present time, the majority of businesses, unlike households where we've all been told to recycle, don't actually recycle because they have to pay extra money for that. So either find out which ones do and support them, or take your recycling home. That's one thing I do.
Can you put pressure on the council to try and change it? Is that something the council can do something about locally to help businesses recycle more?
Yes,
more deeply?
Absolutely. Two things for that. At Borough Council, they had already passed a motion about single-use plastics. It's not perfect, so as the green in the room, I will continually point that out and make sure that they get better at that. I carry this, I don't know if you can see that, it's a sort of camping knife, fork and spoon. If I'm going to be having a meeting and there's a buffet lunch or whatever put on, or any kind of conference I go to, I would just carry those with me because I don't want to use single use. And so there's that sort of thing. The other thing at Town Council that's been really, really good is that I've set up plastic-free Tewkesbury. So you can do that as town councillors, parish councillors, or put pressure on your councillors and ask them to do it. And that's a really, really good one, because that will help the businesses throughout the town, and you basically follow their toolkit, which is brilliant. And actually you'll get a lot of ideas from that anyway. So for David, for his question again, if you're not that experienced, I would recommend that. And it's Surfers Against Sewage, Plastic-Free Towns. And if you get their toolkit, that's really, really useful and shows all sorts of things that you can do. And then one last thing that we also collect at Town Council, this is a bandage. Now this is home use in my cupboard. The date on it is 2015. I'm not going to worry about that. It's just for me at home. But if you're in a business, then, and it's in some ways insane that these have dates on them. The reason they have to is because if this was 40 years old, the elastic might have gone or whatever. So they do have to have dates on, although I think they could be extended. Anyway, if you have a company, they will have first aiders and they will have these sorts of things. When they're out of date, they have to throw them away. They can't give them away because they're no use to anybody else. But what we do is we collect them for our local wildlife sanctuary, and they don't mind that they're out of date. They're sealed, therefore they're still sterile, and they can use those for the animal operations, and that saves them money. It saves that item going straight into the bin as well. So that's a really good one that you can do. All sorts of ideas.
Right, we've got 5 more minutes, and I definitely need to get this question in because
Okay.
several people have been asking about it. I think you caused a bit of a stir when you said, don't buy Marmite, and but that there was an alternative. So I think people need to know what that alternative is, because
I shall fetch it.
okay, thank you. Sit tight, everyone. We need to know. I'm not a Marmite fan at all. My wife Ruth is, and yeah, I could do without it, but to keep the peace, I think we need it in the house. So
I was quite shocked about this one, actually. And you know, if you look on the back of most of your products, you'll see they're owned by Nestle, Unilever, whatever. As I said, there is a website. I think it's in one of my blogs. In fact, it is in one of my blogs. And it will tell you a list of all sorts of things. You think, oh, and at first you kind of think, oh, you know, my husband would say things, oh, that's another thing we can't buy. And I said, actually, but this is about the freedom and the time thing, because I'll go into the supermarket and I know I don't buy those products, and this is about time. So this is the product called Nartex. There we go. Yeast extract. Personally, I think it's even better than Marmite, because no offense to anyone who likes Vegemite, but I think it's horrid. But I actually prefer this. I think it's amazing. And I just get that from the independent, from the sort of health food shops often stock it. And for me, that's a huge improvement. And the money's not going to Unilever, as I said. But I think when we sort of realize where these brands and where the money's going all the time, I don't do things like, I don't buy from Amazon either. And by not doing that, I mean, he's going to be, I think the owner of Amazon is going to become the first trillionaire, which is quite worrying. And packaging as well, buying online, you do get an awful lot more packaging. So if you go to your local shop, you can say you don't need a bag, you know, you can pick up something that would have come through the post with a load of packaging. If you do have the packaging, again, use these sort of social media sites like my Facebook one that I use. I'd say I've got a load of Jiffy bags, who needs them, and somebody will use them. I'd never buy something like that new. I don't buy wrapping paper. I think they said in the UK that wrapping paper could put on end to end would reach to the moon at Christmas time, and I think that's horrific. And we used to save wrapping paper. It gets quite tatty, but what we've moved on really now to material. So I'll use, not that we give a huge number of gifts anyway, but it's still lovely to give presents. So what we do is I'll use something like a tablecloth or a serviette or a napkin. Obviously, if it's friends and family, you can say, can I have my tablecloth back, please? And we'll wrap with ribbons, so you're not using things like sellotape as well. If you're sending in the post, I've got godchildren that I don't see that often, then I'll use things like, this is called an atlas. We used to have these before we all had sat mouse, which obviously I don't have. I pick up these sorts of things at boot sales, charity shops, and this makes beautiful wrapping paper, and I wrap it in string. But I'll use all kinds of bits of string and things like that, and I keep them in a little box and use those. So again, saving money, not buying wrapping paper, because people say, oh, I'll make my own and buy a load of paper and use it. Or they'll say, I've got recycled wrapping paper, but personally I wouldn't use it. And wrapping in material looks beautiful, scarves, tablecloths, sort of thing. It looks really nice.
We've got a couple of minutes left, and there's been another question, a few questions around COVID-19. And I think it might be a good place to end on, as well as if you want to share a kind of final thought. I think we've all seen the single-use plastic consumption go up in the lockdown period. What can we do in terms of changing, or maybe we don't fall into those behaviors going forward, either individually, also in terms of the bigger things, the supermarkets and whatnot, who are probably encouraging that sort of single-use consumption because it helps their bottom line. So can you kind of talk us a little bit through that, and then any kind of final point? We'll go 1 or 2 minutes over, but if you could try and keep it to a couple of minutes, that would be great.
Okay, so COVID, this was a question I did have, and somebody said, how did we manage? And it was interesting. Through lockdown, we bought food. We bought a few seeds and a few plants, which is food because for eating. And my husband had one French book, and that's all we bought. So that was one way of reducing single plastics. Personally, I don't drink coffee, but I've answered the question, and I've sort of said I would find a cafe or restaurant that would let me use my Keep cup, and some of them do. And I think there was a bit of pressure. I think the company's called, is it Mad Hatter's Tea? No, Boston Tea Party. There's a sort of semi-independent chain, I think. There's one in Cheltenham, and apparently they were letting people use those. So you need to use those examples. If they weren't going to let me use a Keep cup, then I just wouldn't. If I haven't been having that coffee and I've been having to have it at home, I will support them when they can do the things that are what I consider to be ethical. So if I can't use my own pots and bags, then I wouldn't use them. It's an interesting thing with COVID because it's hugely brought the awareness of nature and cycling and all sorts of really great green things. I hope we haven't missed those opportunities. I did hear even on Radio 4 yesterday, 3 articles in a row that were talking about green issues, green planning, town planning, that was really good, cycling, all sorts of things. And we're hearing it more and more and more. Keep putting the pressure on. Not everybody wants to do this, obviously I don't mind. So find somebody who doesn't mind. It is a good way of doing it. But if you talk to people, so I'll go down to the local deli and I'll say, right, I want this, but I don't want it in plastic. How do we deal with this? And in fact, you can take your own pot to them. Now, they couldn't do things like olives had to come in a plastic pot during COVID. So I just have to not have olives or buy them in a jar, personally. So I think we have to be careful. There's obviously plastic has its place, and there are some reasons why we have to have single use and certain medication, etc. But for home use, nobody needs a mask that isn't a single use one and those kind of gloves. You can use reusables and wash them as long as you're using them very, very diligently, carefully, properly. So yeah, it's horrific, the amount of plastic waste that's come now into the sea of masks and things like that. I think we need to be very careful that governments and corporations don't backtrack and say, well, we have to for these reasons, because actually glass is probably a cleaner surface than plastics will ever be anyway.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Kate. That was brilliant and really nice mix of personal and kind of bigger picture ideas and topics and ways for us to challenge ourselves and our communities and our businesses around us. So I'm going to just wrap it up there. There's been a lot of ideas that have come up. We're going to capture those in a document, as well as the more comprehensive answers that Kate has written up to the questions we received ahead of time. On that, I will include things like the links to the films Kate mentioned, maybe links to a few of the products she mentioned, where to buy Natex, that's going to be important, and a few other bits and pieces. If you're interested in these sorts of topics, do get in touch with me. You've got my email through the event invitation anyways. If you want to carry on the discussion, we'll hopefully pick things up in September when people have had a chance to have a break and whatnot. So I will leave it there. Thanks very much, everyone. Thank you especially to Kate, who's taken the time out to be with us today. I think we'll all agree that was brilliant. So yeah, enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Make sure you get outside when it cools down a bit.
Thank you very much. Thanks for hosting. Thanks for coming along. Any questions, anytime, just get in touch. Brilliant.